So on last week's video, I told everyone I was thinking about getting a cheap Harbor Freight welder so I could see how good it works. You know, because if it works good, it'd be a cheap way into welding. Well, would you believe that it was the #1 trending subject on YouTube for that day because of that video? That's amazing. Okay, I'm lying. It wasn't #1. It wasn't even close. But I did get like 400 comments that said, review the welder. So today, we're headed to Harbor Freight. We're gonna get a welder. The only problem is the closest welder I could find is in Lincoln, North Carolina. I didn't even know Lincoln had a Harbor Freight. I'm just saying. But we head to Harbor Freight to get a welder, hopefully. There's a Harbor Freight in Lincoln, and we're looking for it. I'm looking for Harbor Freight. It's supposed to be a Harbor Freight in Lincoln. Ain't no dang Harbor Freight here. Somebody's lying to me.
Right beside Zaxby's. You know where it's at?
No.
You know where O'Reilly's is?
Not really. Is it back towards town?
Which way'd you go?
Oh, there it is. I told y'all there's a Harbor Freight in Lincoln. Now, according to Google, they better have some welders. That's all I'm saying. I think this is it. Listen, if you're a beginner welder, make sure you get an auto darkening helmet. You don't want to be messing around with that old technology, because you'll probably be like, get you an auto darkening lens. That's all I'm saying. Now, I gotta hand it to them. Harbor Freight has some decent weld helmets. At least they're decent in how good they work compared to how much they cost. But I saw a $200 weld helmet there that looked a lot like my Miller weld helmet. But my Miller weld helmet was $400. I'm just saying. And they was having a Father's Day sale, so that weld helmet was only like 160 bucks. I finally found me a weld helmet. I only had to go to 3 Harbor Freights, but I found one. It's the best one that Harbor Freight carries. Now we're gonna put this thing through the ultimate test, the David Buff test. Hey man, you wanna use my new helmet?
Can't hide money. Don't you suave.
I'll get you to use it, see what you think about it.
Looks like it's pretty good helmet.
Looks good on you. You want one, don't you?
You gonna make me go buy one?
We're gonna do a little test, see how this thing works. There's a little trick. You do aluminum, preheat your metal, it'll weld better.
It does for me because I don't have a great spool gun. And if I preheat it, it seems like it helps.
That's a spool gun right there. It's for welding aluminum. Your TIG welder's broke, ain't it? Or did you get fixed?
It's fixed halfway, but it's a dinosaur.
Send us a TIG welder, Everlast or somebody. Send us a TIG welder, Miller. Ain't gonna happen.
You ready?
Yeah. Let's see what it'll do. It's pretty to me. Prettier than I do.
See how it wanted to roll up until it got hot.
Yep.
Even though I should have preheated a little bit longer.
The helmet do good?
The helmet done real good.
Can you see?
Yeah, that done good.
Can you see through that big old TV screen? That's a dang TV screen lens. Where'd you see somebody that knew you from a video?
I think it was Ace Hardware. Yeah, he said, man, you think he'd let me on your video? I said, man, that's up to him. I said, I'm just an old fill-in for him.
If you're going to learn to weld, you're going to need a weld helmet. And Harbor Freight has some pretty good weld helmets for the money. No, all of their weld helmets are not the best on the market. But for the price, they have some decent weld helmets. They have some starting at $50. And I've owned a couple of them, and they do work. Now, they're not as fancy as this weld helmet right here. This is the Vulcan weld helmet. And the reason I wanted to try it was because it looks a lot like a Miller weld helmet. I mean, you know what I'm saying. Does that not look like a Miller weld helmet to you? Even the part that fits on your head looks like a Miller. They are a lot alike. Look at these straps. Look at these straps. The inside panel on the Miller, the inside panel on the Vulcan. And I know before anybody starts, I know these aren't exactly the same, but they sure do look similar. And they both sure do have a big sight picture. Plus, if you're making videos like I am and my batteries will go dead or something and I don't have any more, well, then it's always nice to have a backup helmet that you can switch to finish what you're doing. You know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying. And like I said before, I got this helmet on a Father's Day sale. I got 20% off, which made it $160. And that was kind of hard to pass up considering this weld helmet right here is over $400. I'm just saying. So this welder right here is a DC 120 volt with a max amperage of 125 amps. Hence, that's why they call it a Flux 125. The duty cycle on this welder is 90 amps, 30%. If you're running it at 90 amps, it's going to run 30%. Pretty sure the way they figured that, it's out of like 10 minutes. Out of a 10-minute cycle time, it'll run about 3 minutes and it has to cool off for 7 minutes. And I know 30% seems low. Like if you had a business and you was welding, you'd want that to be 80 to 100%. But 30% is not that low. My miller only has a 40% duty cycle. But that duty cycle is rated at more than 90 amp because this is like a 200 amp welder. And something you need to realize, if we run this welder wide open, it can only do 125 amps. I'm not sure the maximum amount of amps that this welder can pull at 120 volts, but I'd say it'd be more like 140 amps. But all the stuff I've welded the whole time I've had this welder, it only kicked off on me one time because I was doing some really long welds. Basically, if the duty cycle kicks off, you just gotta let the fan run and cool the welder back down, and then it'll start right back up. It kicks off to protect it. It don't mean it's broke. Now, I'm gonna get this welder out of this box, and we're gonna do some comparisons to a $160 welder versus a $2,000 welder. Well, it's kind of interesting because I've never seen a welder come with everything hooked up. Like, the lead is hooked up straight out of the box. The ground wire is hooked up straight out of the box. Got your plug in. Everything is hooked up to this welder straight out of the box. And I'm not saying there's nothing wrong with that. I guess this is a literal plug and play. You just plug it in, put some wire in it, you're good to go. Usually the lead's wrapped up separate. It comes with a strap. I'm thinking this is if you need to carry it somewhere, because this is a very light welder and you can use it outside because it's flux core. It also comes with 2 covers and 1 extra tip. Plus it comes with a cover already installed and a tip installed. So you get 2 tips and 3 of these covers, which really is overkill. I bought one of those covers for my miller when I used it welding flux core, and I used it a long time and still got it. I mean, 3 covers is probably plenty. When you switch over to gas, you're gonna need a nozzle. And to be perfectly honest, you can weld just like this. All that covers for is to protect these threads right here in case you ever want to switch over to gas. But this welder can't ever switch over to gas. It's always gonna be flux core. So this cover's really unnecessary, but I kind of like them. I didn't think it would come with the covers, so I bought 2 covers from Harbor Freight to put on this thing and ended up with 5 covers. So don't buy any extra covers, I'm just saying. But I did buy some extra tips. You are going to need extra tips because you can burn back a tip really easy. Okay, I take all that back. I opened this pack of covers and I noticed that it was made a lot nicer. It's got brass on the inside. You see that? Can you see it? Well, the one that comes with it is plastic, and I can tell it's not made as good. But when I tried to put this cover on, it just don't fit. So this cover actually is for a Vulcan, I guess. But you know what? This would probably fit on my miller, but I'll never use it because I got my miller hooked up to a gas bottle. Okay, let's go over some welding basics for you guys that don't weld much. This right here is your lead. Your wire comes from your welder, it goes through your lead, and it comes out this tip right here, which has an electrical charge on it. But this right here is your positive. This wire right here comes out, and it goes over to your negative, or otherwise known as your ground. Now, basic science has taught all us men that if you touch your ground to your positive, we know what will happen.
Want to start the car? I can go now?
Okay, let me make it simpler for you. We've all jumped off a car, and if you touch this red wire to this black wire, you ain't gonna be happy. That's all I'm saying. Because we know that the negative and the positive can't touch. Right? Right. I know this sounds really simple, and I'm trying to make this really simple. So let's say that we want to weld this piece of steel right here, where we're going to have to take our ground and we're going to have to hook it to this piece of steel. Now, this piece of steel is grounded, and our lead is our positive. So now, when the wire comes out of this welder and touches this piece of steel that's grounded, it's gonna cause it to weld. Does that make sense? I mean, that's really as simple as I can make it, because it's not that complicated, but there are some things that you need to know about welding. This lead on here is made pretty decent. I mean, for a $160 welder, this is pretty decent, actually. I believe it's perfectly fine and usable. The lead on my Miller is made a lot better, but it's still not the best lead they sell by any means, because they sell some good leads. And this ground clamp that comes on it, it's really junk. Don't get me wrong, it's junk, but it'll work. And when I clamp it onto something, I mean, it holds on pretty tight, and that's all you really want. But as far as grounds go, and you getting a good ground, this is not the best one there is. And I'll be honest with you, this is not about upgrading this welder or nothing, but you see this bolt right here? If you take this bolt off, you can take the wire out of this ground, right? Then you can go on Amazon and buy you a decent ground, because they're not that expensive, and you can just hook this wire to it, and then you got yourself a good ground. This is one of the cheapest millers they make. It's not the cheapest, it's one of the cheapest. Like I said before, it was like $2,000. I actually bought this 6 years ago off of Craigslist, and I paid $700 for it. But back then, a new one was like $1,300. Now they're $2,000. But I actually did what I'm telling you, so I'm not just saying it. I actually went to a weld store and bought this ground. I took the old junky ground that came on the welder and I threw it away, and I hooked this ground to it. And as far as that goes, it's never give me a minute of trouble. I'm just saying, it's got a much stronger spring. If you watch my videos much, you've noticed I don't hook the ground to the projects I'm working on. And that's because I have a weld table. You can make a weld table, or you can buy a weld table. But all it is a solid steel table that's made just for welding on. And instead of hooking your ground to your material so that it's grounded, you can just take your ground, hook it onto your table, and now your whole table's grounded, and anything steel laying on this table is going to be grounded to it. So now I can take my lead and start welding on this metal, because my whole table is grounded. You understand? Now, when we open the top of the welder, we can see right away that this welder is only going to use the 2-pound spools. You see right there, it says 2 pounds. Well, these are the small spools. All of these right here are 2-pound spools. These 2 spools right here came from Harbor Freight. You could probably tell because they say Vulcan on them. And there's 2 things that you need to look for when you're buying your weld wire. You see how this says MIG solid welding wire? Well, on my Miller, as you can see, it'll hold up to a 10-pound spool. I think that's 10 pounds. Yep, 11 pounds. So this one holds up to a 10-pound spool. It'll also hold the 2 pounds and the 5-pound spools too. This is mild, low alloy steel welding wire. And the regular steel welding wire is kind of a copper color. But we can't use this wire in our Harbor Freight welder, because in order to use this wire, you have to have a shielding gas. And we have a 75-25 shielding gas. And it comes out of our nozzle and it shields the weld, so it doesn't get porosity in it. And porosity is just a bunch of bubbles that makes your weld look like crap. And it actually makes your weld weaker too. So in other words, we don't want this MIG solid welding wire, because you're going to have a shielding gas to use this. And there's no gas hookup on our little $160 welder. That's all I'm saying. This welder has to run flux core. Now this one right here says gasless flux core welding wire. And this is exactly what we want. And flux core wire is going to be silver. At least every time I've ever bought it, it's silver like this. But this actually has flux inside the wire, which protects the weld and keeps it from getting frosty in it. Now, the second thing that we're going to need to look for when we're buying our weld wire, first, make sure it's flux core. Second, we want to know what size it is, and this is 0.030. Most people call it 030 wire. Now, what determines the size of the wire? The first thing is the size of your tips, because you can get different size tips. These tips are a 0.030. I don't know how good you can see this, but this tip here is a 035. See, 0.035. This tip here is for my miller. And what determines what size tips you can run is this little wheel that you have on it. You see on this wheel it says 0.030, 0.035. So we can run two different sizes on this welder. On this little Harbor Freight welder, we'll see if it has it. Okay, you can run 0.030 wire, and you can run 0.035 wire. So you can use either one of these, 030, 035. But don't forget, this wheel, this tip, and this wire has to all be exactly the same thing. Make sure it's flux core, make sure it's the right size. Another thing you can do to improve your welds is buy a better weld wire. This Hobart wire is flux core, it's the right size, and it's made in America. So it's probably a pretty good wire. But I have had a lot of luck using Lincoln inner shield flux core wire. But I'm pretty sure that this wire is not made in America, because it doesn't say made in America anywhere on it. But it does have that Chinamanese writing down there at the bottom, I'm just saying. And this spool here says approved by DB 42-163-0201 L8313-4 USA. But just because it had a quality check in America doesn't mean it was made in America. I'm just saying, I work for a big company too. I know how that stuff works. While we're on the subject, a lot of people's going to knock this welder and say buy made in America. I'm more patriotic than anybody. I mean, I got an American welder, okay? I even got an American made plasma cutter, Hypertherm. I got all kinds of American made stuff. But the fact is, Miller is one of the only welders left that's made in America. Lincoln welders are not made in America anymore. The only difference is Harbor Freight's honest, and they told us where this come from, and they charged us accordingly. This is a $160 welder, people. Anyway, the type of wire can make a difference. Try different ones and find out which one your welder likes the best. That's all I'm saying. First, we're going to take our flux core, put it down on that spindle, and screw the top on that's got the spring in it, because this gives it tension when it's coming off, because you don't want it to come off too easy, kind of like a rod and reel. You need brakes on it. Now the machine will pull it, and you can adjust this later. You can loosen up the tension, or you can tighten up the tension. And then we want to feed it through this little hole right here. It's basically what's going to feed it to the rollers, but when it gets up here, we're going to have to make sure this wire goes into this other little hole right here. You see what I'm saying? So you're probably going to have to hold it with your finger or hold it with a pair of pliers and feed it on through. Once you get your wire fed from this hole to this hole, you see how it's riding in the 0.030 slot right there? Well, then we're going to close this other wheel against it and pull this lever back over and lock it in. There's also a tension on this. This tension right here controls how much tension goes in between these two wheels. You don't want to over tighten this tension either. Once we got all that done, then we'll reach around to the back and cut the power on. Now that our power's on, we're going to pick up our lead and hit the button, which should make these rollers start turning. You see how it pulls it off? You want enough tension on that spool that it doesn't backlash. It's feeding the wire through our lead. We're going to wait for our wire to come out here. But something else you want to think about is try to keep your lead as straight as possible while your wire's feeding through it, so it doesn't kink everything up. You know what I'm saying? I actually wasn't even thinking. You can crank up your wire feed and make them rollers turn faster. See what I mean? Now they come out faster. Maybe. Maybe not. Oh, there it is. Now once your wire comes out, just clip it off. And now we're ready to weld something. simple as that. And this welder right here comes with this easy startup paper, and it basically shows you everything that I've showed you. Well, I thought I'd show you, it might make it a little bit simpler. When I first started welding, this right here was my main problem. I welded way too fast. It's pretty interesting, but you'll get one of these with your welder. Now, something else that'll come in handy to a new welder. See this steel right here? This is 1/8 inch steel. You can buy a little gauge like this. They even make round ones. And it's basically 2 inches long. I can stand up beside something that's 2 inches thick and tell. But all of these notches over here, you got 24 gauge, 22 gauge, 20 gauge. It's got the fractions and it's got the gauges. And see right there, it says 1/8 inch or 0.125. Well, I already know this is 1/8 inch, but let's see if it fits. And well, you know, this is exactly 1/8 inch thick. If you go to the scrapyard like me and buy steel a lot, something like this is pretty handy. That's all I'm saying. Now, inside the welder lid, there is a chart. All the way to the left of that chart shows your wire size. You got 0.030, 0.035. Then you go over to your thickness, and it goes up to 3/16. Now, like I said, our metal's 1/8 inch thick. We even checked, and we're using 0.030 wire. So we go over to 1/8 inch, it says 10 and E.5. So you go to your settings, and our wire speed will be 10, which is wide open, and our heat setting is E.5. So I guess it's halfway between the E and the F, I guess. Now on my miller, it's all numbers, so the E's and stuff I don't know about. And almost every welder on the market has that chart on there to help you set up your welder. Don't get me wrong, because this chart comes in really handy if you're welding something that you've never welded before. But I'm gonna be honest with you, once you get used to your welder, you'll find the settings that you like for different thicknesses of metal. You can set it up the way it welds best. I don't really follow the chart. I weld mine kind of on the hot side because I want to make sure my stuff sticks together good. I'm just saying. Okay, so we've talked about this welder enough. I went ahead and ground down a piece of scrap metal I had laying around. This is like 3/8. And I got a piece of square tubing. I say this is 1/8 inch probably. But we're gonna weld this onto this. You see how rusty this steel is? I mean, it takes steel a long time to rust out. But if you're gonna weld it, go ahead and grind it and clean it up. A good welder will weld through rust, but don't do that. Just don't do that. Just take you a flap disc and grind it down clean, and you'll get much better welds, trust me. And one more thing, remember, we're doing a drag technique. So in other words, the wire's gonna be behind our lead, like this right here. If we were using gas, then we'd be pushing our weld like this right here. You know what I'm saying? Something else we'll remember, we wanna keep our weld right in that groove right there where these two pieces of metal touch. That's where we want the bulk of our weld to be. And there's all different kinds of welds. Like some people make C's while they're welding, some people make boxes while they're welding, some people just goes forward and backwards. But what I kind of do, I started out doing a C, but now I like going from this piece of metal up to this one, back down to this one, back up to this one, back down to this one, back up to this one, back down to this one, if that makes sense. Because I want to get a good burn-in on this piece of metal, and I want a good burn-in on this piece of metal. That's the main thing I'm trying to accomplish while I'm welding. Anyway, let's take our little titanium 125 flux welder, and let's see what it'll do with this metal. First thing we want to do is tack this down. We'll put a tack in each corner just to make sure this thing don't move while we're welding it. So this actually turned out pretty good. My weld is a little bit ugly, don't get me wrong. It's been a while since I used flux core, but it didn't turn out bad. I used a wire grinder on it because it's gonna leave flux on the top. And you can either chip that flux off, or you can use a wire brush if you want to, and just brush off that flux. Me personally, I think it's easier to use a wire brush on a grinder. But like I said, it didn't turn out too bad. My weld's a little bit ugly, but It ain't bad. We flip it over, you can see the burn through right there. You can see burn through right there. And basically what that means is this thing is not gonna come back apart. On the inside, you can see burn through all the way around. After I do a couple passes, this should work just fine. I think on this other side, I'm gonna take the old Miller and weld it so we can compare them together. This right here is my Miller. And as you can see, this is a pretty smooth weld. This is the Harbor Freight weld. And no matter what you think about it, this is still a good weld. You see the burn through from the Miller and you see the burn through from the Harbor Freight. The Miller does look a little bit better and it's a whole lot prettier. Both of these welds are going to hold good though. The Miller side does have a better burn in on the inside though. It's a little bit better. But we are comparing a $160 welder to a $2,000 welder. So you shouldn't expect it to be just as good. Now, one other thing, I'm running this Miller on 120, just like the Harbor Freight welder runs on 120, because that's going to make this comparison more fair. I think that you can get the Harbor Freight looking better than this, honestly, because I haven't played with it very much. Just test out different settings and see what it gives you, because you might can set it up just a little bit better than what that chart tells you. Now, here's a side-by-side of these two welders welding simultaneously so you can see the difference. There's nothing wrong with flux core wire. It's just a lot easier and cleaner and faster to use gas. Now, if you think one day that you might want to hook up gas to your welder, then you're probably not going to want to buy this welder, because this welder will not hook up to gas. It's flux core only. That's the back of it. There's nothing back there. There's no hookups on the front of it. There's no way to hook this welder up to gas. But you can see this right here. This is a gas hookup, which allows you to put a bottle onto your welder. If you think one day that you might want to get gas, then you're better off going ahead and spending a little bit more money and going up a few steps on your welder. That way you can put gas on it later and you're not stuck with a flux core welder forever. But if you're cool with a flux core welder, then there ain't nothing wrong with this, except for maybe it's not going to weld super thick steel. That's all. There's hundreds of YouTube videos if you really want to learn how to weld. You know, in the end of things, that welder done what it was supposed to. It stuck two pieces of metal together, and I'm pretty sure they ain't coming back apart. I think it'll work fine for any DIY type project that you have in mind. And it's hard to ask for more from a $160 welder. I'm just saying. Harbor Freight makes another titanium welder, and I think it's a MIG 140, and it costs around $450, but I see it on sale all the time for $300 and something. If it was me, if you think that you might like welding and that you may get into it a little bit more, then I would suggest at least going up to that welder, because that welder has a gas hookup, so later on you can get a bottle and have shielding gas, which is really MIG welding, because you've got flux core and you've got MIG. And on that little experiment that we done, you kind of seen what the difference is in those types of welding. But this little 125 flux core welder, it did a fine job. Hey, if you like this video, then you're probably gonna like this video, or this video, or one of my videos. So go over to my channel page and check out some of my videos, because you're probably gonna find something you like. You know what I'm saying? I'm serious. Go over there and check it out, because this video's over.